Professional animatronic guidelines refer to maintaining the illusion of life. This requires masking motor noise, hiding sensors, and programming micro movements like breathing and blinking, specifically to dissimulate the static, robotic reality of the object when it is idle. When Fisher-Price developed the 10th anniversary edition Tickle Me Elmo T.M.X in 2006, they engaged in extreme secrecy specifically to hide the mechanical method until the product launch. There were code words, oaths of secrecy, restricted access, and controlled exposure prior to launch. The 40 people privy to its development had to sign confidentiality agreements, while retailers were required to buy the product before seeing it. Even the Fisher-Price sales force was not allowed to see the toy. The secrecy was to protect the advanced two-motor mechanics and to ensure the public experienced the effect, the extreme movement and illusion of vitality, without understanding the method. Adults buy technology, children buy friends. To sell a friend, you must hide the factory that built it. In these categories of toys, the sale is not just the object itself, but the successful suppression of skepticism. Nintendo does not view itself as a technology firm, at least exclusively, but as a toy maker. Nintendo's own investor relations language says Nintendo is not just a video game company, but also a toy company, and it links toys to a sense of wonder. Guardian video game reporter Keza MacDonald writes, "For Eric Voskuil, a Dutch Nintendo collector, the Ultra Hand was the beginning of a fascination with the company's pre-video game history. After discovering that the man who had invented the Game Boy had been making toys for 20 years prior, he set about trying to acquire some of them. It is little wonder that this particular group of Japanese toy makers would be drawn toward the most exciting nascent technology of the 1970s, electronic games. These were Nintendo's formative years as a toy company, a group of product designers, few of whom had much experience, trying out random ideas with whatever technology they had at hand, led by a company president with a knack for knowing which of them to take to market. How Nintendo operated as a toy maker is not all that different from how the company makes video games today. Then, as now, its game designers were looking for that kernel of fun that could be expanded into something that would sell. Nintendo is very aware of its own history, and little tributes to its time as a toy maker crop up in plenty of its games, from WarioWare to Super Smash Bros. The company likes to blend the physical and digital, creating entertainment that straddles those two worlds. Where the Game Boy camera brings your virtual creations into the real world with the aid of a printer, the Wii Remote translates your physical motion into actions on screen. This is emblematic of the way the company has always seen itself since it made the move into electronics in the 1970s. Not as a technology company, but as a toy maker. Shigeru Miyamoto spoke to this back in 2014 in response to a skeptical investor on a Nintendo earnings call. Nintendo is known as a video game company, but in fact, it is also a toy company, he said. Toys must make consumers feel a sense of wonder. With video game software, we can think about many different ways to emulate that feeling by creating virtual experiences. When it comes to video game hardware, the hardware development companies tend to take the similar and rather unified course of aiming to beef up the machine's functionalities. In our efforts to differentiate our hardware from others, I believe it is important that users experience that feeling that they have played with a new toy. Miyamoto was talking about perhaps Nintendo's most literal marriage of toy and technology, Amiibo, the range of plastic figures that launched in 2014, which can be tapped on a Nintendo console to unlock outfits, characters, or other little bonuses within games. This is neat, but I think I speak for most collectors when I say that my own amiibo mostly live on a shelf. For me, their appeal comes not so much from their utility as from the delightful attention to detail in their construction. Nintendo applies as much design know-how and aesthetic flair to these figures as it ever has to its consoles. They are sturdy, colorful things, and it is irresistibly charming to see a Zelda Bokoblin or Splatoon Inkling in the plastic flesh. Nintendo also applies this toy maker philosophy to its consoles, be it the 100 million selling Nintendo Switch or the 13 million selling Wii U. They are designed to innovate, to offer a novel flavor of fun to the people who buy them. And if the inevitable byproduct of that attitude is the occasional dramatic flop, Nintendo has designed its business to weather the storm. Nintendo's former president, Satoru Iwata, wrote, "Apple clearly specializes in technology, while Nintendo focuses on entertainment. This results in massive differences in priority. Make no mistake, I would, without hesitation, choose to make a product sturdier over making it 0.5 millimeters thinner. And I don't think Apple needs to subject the iPod to the sort of endurance testing where it's dropped repeatedly from the height of a bicycle basket." Japanese business and technology reporter Osamu Inao writes, "Iwata doesn't forget to emphasize one difference between the two companies. We've done all sorts of things to play to our strengths, to paint a bright future for ourselves. And in the end, people have started to say, wow, Nintendo's a lot like Apple, but we're an amusement company, and Apple's a tech company. There are lots of differences that arise from that. Amusement and technology. Put another way, one makes toys and the other makes appliances." And you could see a lot of different headlines support that point. You know, Nintendo courts non-gamers. We are not just a video game company. They have a gaming population expansion strategy, so they often focus on things beyond just games and toys, in fact. Their famous philosophy, lateral thinking with withered technology, pioneered by Gunpei Yokoi, Nintendo's legendary game and toy designer, emphasizes that they rarely use the newest, most transparently powerful tech. Instead, they use older, cheaper technology, withered, in surprising ways, lateral thinking, to create a magic experience. When you play the Wii, you aren't thinking about the technology that goes into it. You're thinking about swinging a tennis racket around. The magic. Referring to the magic of Nintendo Labo, MacDonald quotes Nintendo designer Shinya Takahashi and writes, "Using Nintendo Labo as an example, the starting point was the Joy-Con controller. Our software development team came up with some ideas, and then they talked to the hardware team to see if they had ideas to realize as well. It was through those collaborative discussions that the idea of using cardboard models came along." It's clear from how Takahashi talks about how Nintendo operates today that Gunpei Yokoi's philosophy is still alive and well. It's not so much about how advanced the technology is, but what you can do with it. We always keep an eye on new technology. We always want to make new and surprising things, so we're always watching what's going on, he says. That said, we also look at older technologies to see if we can leverage them in new ways. New technologies tend to be a bit too advanced. We try to find ways to make technology more approachable. Is there a greater encapsulation of the marriage of new ideas and old technology than a set of magic cardboard models? Miyamoto tells me that these days, Nintendo's consoles are about optimizing the technology that already exists, making sure that things like loading speeds are as fast as they can be to make games feel seamless. Inao notes that it's easy to forget that only a decade ago, Nintendo, its name once synonymous with home consoles, looked like a has-been, competing against electronics giant Sony and now software behemoth Microsoft would surely finish off a relatively puny company that prided itself on its toy-making history. Remaining humble despite immense success and not forgetting their just a toy maker is another stance underwritten by Yamauchi's teachings. And Yamauchi, of course, was the longtime president of Nintendo that really got it famous. Shigeru Miyamoto, the creator of Donkey Kong, Mario, Link, Star Fox, etc., has said, "What's really important is viewing Nintendo almost like a toy company, where we're making these things for people to play with." So, in future videos, we'll look at evidence that Nintendo conforms to this secrecy pattern. I will begin to expose the magic trick. Stay tuned.